First of all, thank you for inviting us. This is great to be here and such a beautiful place and a lot to see. And we really appreciate being able to tell you about our work. We're going to talk in terms of our aesthetic interventions. We do work in a studio, we do a lot of research, we do a lot of drawing, sketches, data collection, but all of our work eventually ends up in nature, on the land, and that's where we build it, and we work with a lot of communities to actually help us build some of the larger ones. So we do rely on a great deal of research, scientific, cultural, historic, and it's important for us to also either walk the land, and oftentimes we live on the land that we're working on. And so we're going to move to two projects we want to show you in detail, and then we have a lot of other samples, and you'll get the idea of the kind of work we do after we've described a couple of projects. So this project we're going to talk to you about started 150 years ago, and these are the California gold fields. And after they panned gold for a while and they realized there's a lot in there, they got real impatient and they said, bring in the big guns and let's start blasting it out of here. So this is hydro mining, and it pulled the gold out, but it also pulled an incredible amount of silt, and a lot of that silt ended up
in the San Francisco Bay.
Yeah, and it's still coming. They realize it's still coming down the rivers into the bay.
So that's what silted our bay up, and that's what silted up a lot of oyster reefs. And the ones that weren't silted up, they were blown up by the Corps of Engineers as navigational hazards. So we're left with climate change and things like that. The water in the bay is rising. It's alarming. We're prescribed by NOAA to have multi-thousand acres of reefs. And this is the kind of reef that it's a scientific study. It's made of the castings of sewer pipes, and it's very, very effective. But it's very orderly.
Yeah, they're mostly lined up so they can be tested. They're huge. They're at least 500 pounds each, and they need to be put in with a barge and a crane. So we looked at that and said, well, it's efficient.
Oh, there's one other thing, like those works that you saw. Could you go back a second?
It's not easy to do.
They're made of concrete, and in San Francisco Bay, there's absolutely no more fill allowed. But they're turning their heads on this project right here. Those are made of concrete. Shell is mixed in, and different chemical agents.
So the idea of the reefs, the oysters will attach to the reefs. Oysters will attach to anything, asphalt, plywood, concrete, boats, whatever, as long as they're still. And these will catch oysters. They'll eventually, if they stay in here long enough, knit together and create a reef outside of the shorelines that protect the eelgrass. And then the eelgrass is the second line of defense for rising sea levels and surge in our area. So we look at those and we see something more like this. And we came to this conclusion by using part of the problem, which is that silt. And
we actually harvested the silt and created a form that would stand on its own and put them together. And they're very effective in terms of a substrate for oysters to attach to. So we solved that problem of having a substrate and putting them together. I think our motivation was that in San Francisco Bay, putting these oyster reefs in is going to make available a lot of open space and a lot of accessibility to the bay. So we felt going around the bay and seeing the same form for the same problem was something that we felt we could make an intervention on, and that's what we're doing. These forward things are the reefs that you just saw. And the natural reef that you can see in the background is how reefs construct themselves naturally.
So we thought about this, and we looked at the two different ways. One's very efficient and large, but what would you rather see out in front of your shoreline?
Not only that, there's a humongous carbon footprint in creating concrete pieces, having barges take them out, have them unloaded by cranes, and they're not really arranged in any kind of natural form. They're arranged in a straight form to test the hydrology of the reef itself.
And all of our work involves community. We're just two people, and we design and plan and research things, but we actually need community to help us do it. So we come up with some ideas, and we come up with some designs, and these are actually the reef that you saw in our studio, and we involve communities in helping us walk them into the water versus hiring a large barge and a crane.
Yeah, we can put 5 of these components together and lace them together with those wood grasses, and 2 people can carry 5 to 10 units out. So that eliminates a barge, a crane, and the heavy equipment that makes the carbon footprint really go up.
Well, and there's also a sense of ownership with the people that help us build these versus asking them just to come out and count oysters to see if it was successful. We actually ask them to get involved in our project. It's important we test them, and we test a lot. So we test with the UC Davis lab, and San Francisco State is testing oysters in the bay. And those are the two scientific groups that we've aligned with on this project. And then there's some other environmental groups and community groups that we work with. This is actually in the lagoon that's being opened up to Lake Merritt, that they're opening the gates, and so they're getting a better mix of the bay water into this lagoon. This was a great place to put them, but there's always something, and in here what we did find is we did have attachment, but there is other organisms that eat the oysters, like drills that'll go in and just, and it seems like most of our projects, there's some little invasive thing coming at us that wasn't part of the project that can really be a big factor, as you all know, with invasives. So here we are in that same lagoon, and we put them in, we pull them out, test them, clean them off. This was a particularly good one that wasn't in that lagoon, but was at Oyster Point, and we know why it's called Oyster Point, and those are all the native oysters. So the San Francisco native oysters, and the places that you all hear about, shell mounds, and the Ohlone ate oysters like crazy, but they were not much bigger than this.
There's mature oysters on there, the larger ones that are intact. Those are live oysters. That piece is very successful. A lot of oysters attached to that substrate, but you can see in the whiter spots that those are the oysters that they attached, but they either had a drill
or just wave action took them off.
So
they'll attach, and oysters, want to attach mostly on top of other oysters. So that's the point with these substrates, with the big sewer pipe balls, is to get enough oysters, to get other oysters, and then eventually the reef knits itself together. And that's what gives you that protection. So this is something we're still working on.
Yeah, we harvest a lot of clay from the bay. We're trying different ways to clean it. We don't put any additives in it or anything like that. And we create these cones. Cones are pretty good for it's a nice platonic solid that holds itself up and pretty simple. So
well,
it's geometric. We can figure out the area, so we can figure out how many oysters are on there and what they're doing compared to other.
And if any of you have worked with ceramics, then when you get clay from the store, it's got wonderful additives into it that allow it to stand up. What we are insistent upon, that we don't add anything into this clay silt. And part of that is this litigious question we have that if it came from the bay originally, and we take it out and we fire it as ceramics, if we put it back in the bay, will BCDC, which is the Bay Conservation and Development Commission, allow it to stay? And so there's a little bit of a little political inquiry here to see what can we do as citizens to protect against basically global warming. So this is a second project that kind of goes on the same theme. We traveled to southern Louisiana, and everything they say about southern Louisiana is true. We couldn't quite believe when they told us. Back then they told us it's 3 football fields a day that are disappearing. I just read yesterday it's a football field an hour. That's 300 yards. Anybody? 300 yards of football field? You can't believe it, but while we were working on this...
Coming down through the Mississippi,
Yeah.
it's draining the basin, and it's just washing silt down, and
Well, and the silt's just shooting out into the Gulf, and there's nothing capturing it. There's several things, again, geopolitical going on, but oil companies will dig a canal to bring their pipe in, to bring their oil in, and within a couple of weeks, the canal has collapsed on itself. So they dig more, or the pipe will be buried.
yeah, the lower part of Louisiana is just saturated with water. But we were able to find this used to be a grazing area for cattle.
Like a cow pasture,
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago, and it's just flooded over. At lower tides, this is an island that we're restoring and planting a number of trees there as a first defense, and the flags are at high tide. There's a lot of hunters that come out to this area, so the flags are up to divert the hunters in their boats to other areas and leave this restored area alone.
So here's just the beginning of the monitoring, and you can see part of the island in the middle that's coming back is seasonal. You know, there is obviously a tidal action here, but there's also the weight of the whole drainage. The whole watershed of the United States is coming down the Mississippi, at least that part of the United States. So it does flood, but this island in the middle wouldn't hold if there wasn't something planted there. The cypress are growing. These are bald cypress, which is their line of defense. They've lost a lot of it, but had they not lost their cypress at Katrina, that storm surge wouldn't have done what it did. I mean, it still would have reached, into New Orleans, but it wouldn't have done it what it did. So they're trying to plant cypress like crazy, and they'll go out. The fellow that took us out, he's known to plant maybe 500 in a day, and he'll come back, and there'll be 100 left. What's happening? Well, there's also this invasive, and that is an invasive rodent that's eating them faster than you can plant them, and it's a real thing.
We built that little wire cage
to protect them.
They have short legs, so they don't stand real tall. So the baskets we cut about 18 to 24 inches beyond what they could reach, and we just put them around the trees and stake them with a large pole, and it seemed to work and keep the nutria away from chewing them. They've got to get through about 2 years of growth before their roots take.
Then they're on their own.
Yeah.
So this is the island starting to come back, and our fellow that we worked with actually has sent us pictures, and the trees are thriving. This was a pilot project. This was a demonstration to all of those neighbors that are landowners down there and want to do this in their own backyard. And that is a lot of what's happening with the restoration down there is private landowners.
Yeah.
It can be done. This is 50 trees, and they're going on their 3rd year, and they're doing well. So that was another community-based project. And we're just going to run through a few things here to show you how we approach these. We do work on what we call our own aesthetic language, interpreting what the needs, what the problems are. This is actually completely different scenario. We're in terminal rivers up in the northern Nevada desert. This is actually on the Truckee River.
Some construction details of how we might put things together.
The reef components,
without breaking them, and then some habitat structures that play with trees, and this particular one right here rises and falls with the amount of water that's in this backwater off a floodplain, and that the bottom construction is a fish habitat, so it can rise and lower as the water does.
So on this project, we're working with the Nature Conservancy east of Reno, Nevada, and they re-engineered the about 11 miles of the Truckee River. So we're working not only with the re-engineered plans that they've given us in advance of the bulldozers, but after the bulldozers leave and the river is re-meandered, what's left? Well, what's left is the native vegetation. And that's what we try to use in our projects, is what we can find on site and how we can utilize that. It gives us the best chance of success because that's what belongs there.
We do our own mapping. We
This
have
is
our
a
own
rule.
language for what things mean. Some of those shaded areas are heavy grazing areas. So there's a lot of nitrogen in the soil, and they just inform our process as to how we would approach a project.
And then here's an urban plan for stormwater capture, working with infrastructure, or already built infrastructure in the city in North Carolina.
You can't really expect anything when you concrete and pave over an urban area. What these are designed to do is to return to a native hydrology, where you can. This is basically the spread and sink idea, with a number of filters and things like that can filter a lot of water at one time in an urban area.
So we're getting close to our time, aren't we? So I'm just going to go through some of our projects and show you the end results of a lot of these. The floodplain wall on the Carson River, pushing the water, capturing the water, pushing it back. It's also a lot of habitat elements there. Here's back to California, one of the years that we actually had water in a creek. You can see what our approach there.
We do a lot of stream bank stabilization and silt reduction.
So we do work on the watershed. We work actually in the water, upland. This is quite a bit upland, trying to filter agricultural waste, meaning cows, from going right into a salmon spawning stream, one of the few up in Northern California that we have in our area. Similar.
Another bank stabilization project.
And again, this is urban runoff. From this school behind here in this neighborhood, the stormwater just wasn't, the city grew faster than they could accommodate what was happening. And
during a rainstorm, a lot of plants come down from the neighborhood and get
A lot of water,
and bring through water. They bring a lot of seeds, and so instead of going directly into the creek and being dispersed throughout the creek meander, we can keep it back here and filter it, and just allow that water to sink into the ground.
And in this project, we're actually able to use a lot of those non-natives, which are quite colorful, but we make sure they're really dead, because if they do have a seed bank, then we're really in trouble. And then our goal is to get that to grow up, and eventually willow, dogwood, cottonwood, whatever it is that we're back planting. We do a lot of habitat work, but it's usually habitats close to the riparian area of a watershed. It's hard to know where the riparian area is in a desert sometimes, but
look for anything green.
We were still close enough to the water that we could attract water birds as well as migrating warblers, etc. Here's also another area of that, just a different take on habitat. You should come around here. You got your back to the.
Sometimes we'll have to make components and take them out to the upper parts of watersheds where the tributaries come in and gullies, and a lot of gully repair, and then use riparian material from the site and fill the baskets, anchor them in with live stakes to allow the piece to allow water to flow through the piece, but at the same time put live stakes in so that it'll grow, and that's really the sustaining component.
So here we're working with arroyo willow, a real common on the coast. You have a lot down here too, and those will grow up in that basket. When Jessica was introducing us, they do disappear, but we look at it as our work doesn't really disappear, but it just becomes something else. So this became a nice willow grove in this gully that just absorbed a lot of that agricultural waste in the runoff of the watershed. in a lot of neighborhoods, yeah, we lost our creeks too, but the few that exist are so incised, are so deep down in their own trough, their own gully, that their banks are just collapsing. So here was another treatment of that before the rains, and then during the rains it held up pretty good.
Yeah, this is a pretty effective piece. It's really temporarily. We didn't think it would last 3 years, but it buys you 3 years to come up with other solutions, what to do with water and prevent collapsing banks. But that's lasted over 6 or 7 years,
Yeah.
and it's
And it's
we put
growing. I
willows in.
mean,
Yeah,
we
it's
put
growing.
willows, and then it catches a lot of its own vegetation coming down the stream. We hope most of that's native, but
Sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't matter as long as it's a robust anchoring structure.
and then we end with this, and this is a fairly recent project that's starting to grow. If you look, you can see these willows starting to pop up, and this is actually on the river. It's very dry at this time of year. It's what we call a J-hook. It's a hydrology term that actually sits on the bank of the river and will catch silt, provide shade for the fish that are swimming by. It's just kind of a little niche, and without that, you would get a lot of this dirt and ground in the river and clogging it up, and then your little pool would be gone. So there you have it, and this is something that a pretty well-known curator in the Bay Area said about our work, and so we usually just end with that. It's what our trajectory is, right?
Yep. Thank you for having
Okay,
us.
thank you so much.